We continue on to our weekly segment now, Korea Book Club, where we explore the world of Korean literature and books through notable recent works in Korean and in English translations as well. And to help us do that, we have joining us in the studio today cultural essayist Colin Marshall, host of the podcast Colin의 한국 and author of the essay collection 한국 요약 금지. Colin, hello, it's great to see you again.
Glad to be here, Jung-ho.
So today you've brought in a book with a very interesting cover. Alongside the title, it has words all across it. And on close inspection, you can see that they are the names of movie titles in English and Korean. So can we assume it has something to do with cinema?
We can indeed. The book is 영화 보고 오는 길에 글을 썼습니다, or I wrote on the way home from the movies, which is a suitable enough title for a collection of writings on film. And they're the writings on film of Kim Jung-hyuk in particular, who is best known as a novelist, but who's published for a long time in a variety of fields over a variety of subjects. And as for which movies he writes on the way home from, with their titles in both Korean and English on the cover, even someone unfamiliar with not just Korean cinema, but the Korean language as well, can take a glance at this book and get a sense of what they are. So such a person might well recognize quite a few of the approximately 80 movies in question, which include Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One and The Fabelmans, animated hits like The Boy and the Heron from Studio Ghibli, Inside Out from Pixar, the latest Indiana Jones, Top Gun, Spider-Man movies, winners of the Academy Award for Best Picture like Chloe Zhao's Nomadland, and Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert's Everything Everywhere All at Once, and maybe even The Florida Project, which came out a few years ago now, but which was directed by Sean Baker, whose Anora won Best Picture and much else besides at the Oscars earlier this very month.
Right, so this is a Korean non-fiction book then, a series of essays by Kim Jung-hyuk, a popular and high-profile writer in Korea. Also
Yes,
a cartoonist, I understand.
Yes, he's a man of many skills, many talents.
Indeed, and also he's known as a music and film columnist as well, so he is a writer with many interests. Now, most of the films you mentioned are major American films, so can we take Kim for a fan of Hollywood movies in particular?
Well, yes and no. Judging by the subjects of the essays in this book, all of which came out over the past decade or so, he certainly watches a lot more Hollywood movies than I do. But he also writes about plenty of Korean films, as well as relatively lower-profile pictures from the US and Europe, like Norwegian movies, Finnish movies, they're in here. The span of cinema with which he engages is wide enough to remind me of the critic I grew up reading, Roger Ebert, who for decades stood, or rather sat, as the personification of film criticism in American popular culture. Every Thursday after school, I'd go straight to his section of the Chicago Sun-Times website and read his reviews of the new movies that week. And whether or not I had any intention of going to see them in the first place, I read the reviews, though sometimes what he wrote convinced me to do so. And I should add, this isn't entirely an uncommon phenomenon or uncommon experience of Americans of my generation who now write about film themselves, or who write about any aspect of culture, for that matter.
Yes, he is quite an iconic figure.
It's true, and we learned how to watch movies from him, I mean, from his observations. One of his most famous lines being, "It's not what a movie is about, it's how it's about it." A still necessary warning, I would say, against perceiving a film or any work of art through its subject matter alone. And he also advocated for judging a particular movie against movies in the same category. So, as he once put it, when you ask a friend if Hellboy is any good, you're not asking if it's any good compared to Mystic River. You're asking if it's any good compared to The Punisher. You know, a film made to win an Oscar and a film made to please comic book fans are two entirely different things. And this isn't to say that I sense the direct influence of Ebert on Kim Jung-hyuk, though both do demonstrate the ability to turn a piece of writing ostensibly about a movie into a mini essay on a broader subject. And as Kim puts it, he doesn't want to write about film. He wants to write using film as a starting point. His consideration of Nomadland, for instance, takes the film's semi-fictional, semi-documentary portrayal of seasonal Amazon warehouse workers who crisscross America in their RVs, and he arrives at a meditation on the concept of home itself, what home can consist of. In his piece about Kim Ji-yoon's film Gomijip, a little-seen comedy about Korean filmmaking under the censorship regime of the 1970s, which I quite enjoyed when it came across on video on demand, he mostly discusses the art of log lines, those punchy one- or two-sentence descriptions of movies meant to pique viewer interest. And he eventually comes around to a weak log line as an explanation for Gomijip's failure at the box office. Then he tries to write a better one himself.
Interesting. So he does seem to be a writer who really does have a deep appreciation of movies and perhaps a real knowledge of the industry as well. Has he actually spent time as a professional film critic?
Well, he hasn't made a career out of it the way that Ebert did, but he has published quite a lot of film criticism over the years, going at least as far back as his first column for the magazine Shine Ishipil, a popular film magazine in Korea, in 2009. And he's actually published several collections of his film writing in book form before, though I don't know whether any of them are quite as lavishly illustrated as 영화 보고, 오는 길에, 글을, 썼습니다. In addition to writing, he also draws, and each of the short essays in this book is preceded by a kind of diagrammatic illustration that offers a glimpse into his thought process about the movie under consideration. They're all surrounded by notes, and while I can't say I find his handwriting 100% legible, I do appreciate that he approaches in a visual manner what is, after all, a visual medium.
Right.
And what's also of special interest to me, and would be to anyone who writes essays, is that he begins the book by taking the reader through an example of how he starts thinking about a movie before writing about it. In this case, the movie, this case study, is Past Lives, the 2023 indie hit by Korean-Canadian director Celine Song. He imagines 4 different ways he could begin the essay on past lives, writing sort of about how it triggered a memory of seeing a particular painting, Paul Gauguin's painting D'où venons-nous, que sommes-nous, où allons-nous, or Where do we come from, what are we, where are we going, at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And in the event, the essay uses all 4 possible openings, all 4 in a row, which resonates with the themes of the film, given that it deals with a Korean writer living in the US, but who wonders what her life could have been if she hadn't left Korea. Incidentally, I imagine that Kim Jung-hyuk might have approached the movie differently had he been writing about it a few months later in 2024, given that its protagonist explains her emigration by saying that, and I quote, Koreans don't win the Nobel Prize in Literature. A good bit of inadvertent comic timing, at least on the film's part.
Right. That clip from the film did go viral after
Yes.
Han Gang's Nobel Prize win last year. Okay, so you mentioned that this book contains essays about both foreign and Korean films. But Past Lives is an interesting one because it could be considered both, as it involves both Korean and foreign characters, settings, dialogue and themes.
Right.
I understand that Kim also comments on some other movies from that same culturally in-between zone, should we say.
He does, yeah. Some listeners, if they think back to 2017, in the mists of history, may remember Columbus, the debut feature, from a Korean-American filmmaker who works under the name Kogonada, a handle under which he first became known, to me at least, as a cinema-oriented video essayist on the internet. I was a big fan of those video essays, and indeed a big fan of Columbus, though I admit that I never did get around to seeing his second film After Yang, which came out in 2021. And in part, I've probably just been afraid that it wouldn't live up to the standards set by Columbus, but Kim Jung-hyuk's consideration of the movie, which is included in the book, may get me to watch it yet. Also included in this book, 영화 보고, 오는 길에, 글을, 썼습니다, is a piece on Lee Isaac Chung's film Minari, which received a great deal of critical acclaim in 2020 in America, and like many explicitly Korean-American themed films, it tells an immigration story, but not using cliches or what have become cliches now, like parents who run a convenience store in a troubled urban neighborhood, or kids who get made fun of for bringing kimbap to school. It's different. And I get the impression that apart from Yoon Yo-jong's Oscar-winning performance as the grandmother, Minari's story of an immigrant family trying to farm in Arkansas in the countryside didn't make a huge impact on audiences here in Korea. Yet, Kim Jung-hyuk finds his way into it by writing about the work the parent characters do upon arriving in America. And they're separating male and from female chicks all day long at a hatchery. And as explained in the film, the females can lay eggs, so they're valuable, but the males get disposed of because no one has a use for them, which directly reflects a theme of great importance for the family's unhealthy young son, whose aspirations and fears are in many ways at the center of the story. And when you take a step back and think about it, those themes are also universal. We know whether you're Korean-American, Korean-Korean, Korean something else, or like me, none of the above.
Indeed. So clearly, Kim is a writer who thinks a lot about films and is able to write about them to make others think about them as well. As I said, he's a popular figure here in Korea, and I imagine the book has done pretty well here.
See it around, certainly.
Sure, and it's interesting to know that there is a book like this in Korea, but I suspect it's probably not something that we will find published in an English translation anytime soon, right? What do you think?
It's true. I think for writers like this, a lot of Korean writers, even if they're big here, first thing to get is their novels translated into English. And he deals with a French-Belgian film called The Translators, which I actually quite liked. And he writes an essay about being translated himself. He didn't say to what language, but I think he's only just starting to get translated into other languages. So it's a remote possibility that his collections of film writings will be translated. But maybe his novels first, and if you're getting into the Korean language and you know Hollywood movies, wouldn't be a bad book to read because you sort of know what he's talking about, right?
Sure. It sounds like a fascinating book nonetheless. Once again, it's called 영화 보고 오는 길에 글을 썼습니다 by Kim Jung-hyuk, and that was our pick for Korea Book Club this week. Colin, thank you for that review today, and we'll see you again next time. Take care.
See you next time, Jang-ho.
Right, that's it for our show today. We'll be back tomorrow, so we hope you can join us again then. I've been your host, Kwon Jang-ho, and thank you as always for listening. Goodbye.